Okay, let's walk through an entire pipeline, starting with audio in Premiere, heading to Photoshop, taking the Photoshop and timing it to the audio, and then sending out a QuickTime, an MP4, to head back into Premiere for editorial. This is one of a couple of pipelines. I think this is the one that I would suggest doing for a variety of reasons. One is that the Adobe Suite is ubiquitous and we have access to it. Two is that by drawing your backgrounds in Photoshop, you can continue them underneath the action so you don't have to redraw them as a layer. They'll stay consistent from shot to shot, pose to pose, I should say. This may seem like it goes quick, but don't worry. This is just an overview. We're going to see each of these processes in just a little bit more detail in the next couple of weeks, starting with audio and then heading to maybe more complicated things in Photoshop and maybe even adding some things in After Effects. So let's get started. I've done my thumbnails here, and I'm ready to maybe start doing some timing here. I've got all the dialogue recorded, and I've done that in Adobe Premiere. In Premiere, we can make a new timeline. You've set up all of your stuff in advance here. To do so, we're going to go to Edit, Preferences, Audio Hardware. And for me, I've got it going through this microphone, but you might have it going through a microphone that you've got plugged in directly or the onboard microphone for your computer, if it has one. You'll also want to turn off your or plug in some headphones because it will monitor your sound directly when you record it. So for me, what I usually do is to just mute it and then unmute it when I need to test what I've heard. Kind of a drag. I should really get some kind of a hardware system where I can just slide it down temporarily while recording it, or just always wear headphones while recording, and that seems to work pretty good too. But you'll hear yourself in the talkback and it becomes very confusing. It's about a second off. On my machine you might see the same thing. So if you start talking, all of a sudden you'll hear yourself talking back to you in a second and it'll drive you crazy. But then in order to record, I can just hover directly over the little record icon, this little microphone icon that's at the end of any track. So in this case what I did was to hit record here, and then I recorded these items. I'll just very quickly do an example of feedback here so you can see what it looks like. If I hit record, it gives you a little countdown, and then you can see that it's doing an echo and it's driving me crazy. So I won't use that, but we can listen to it back. If we solo it, we can hear that it actually recorded fine. And then you can see that it's doing an echo and it's driving me. What you're hearing there is the recording of the speakers doing echo. If you didn't have speakers, if you had it going on in headphones, then you would not hear it here. So here's what I recorded, and I could use a beer.
Oh, I would love a beer.
I'm getting the beer, aren't I? So I'm trying to guess the timing on this, like how many seconds does it take, and I'm going to move this over a little bit. How many seconds does it take before they start talking, and how much of a pause do I want comedically for him?
Of a beer.
Pause, 1, 2, maybe it's there. I'm getting the beer, aren't I? And I always do this little stutter with it. I'm getting the beer. So I could cut that out if I don't like it. I'm getting the beer, aren't I?
That's right.
And I'd like to get that space. I'll pick up the Q a little bit, so I'm going to delete the blank space there. I'm just using the C for cut tool, and then the V for the move tool, and move that back in time. I'm getting the beer, aren't I?
That's what I like about you, Rick. You're the quickest, brightest, smartest counselor at Camp Forest Lake.
And then he gets up, and maybe we're going to hear the noise of that.
Oh, don't bother.
Okay, so then there's a big gap, during which time we go out. Maybe not that big a gap. Let's leave it there. So again, I'm guessing. Without seeing the graphics here, without seeing the timing, I really don't know what I've got. But now I can export this. We'll call this something. Let's name it something other than sequence 1. We'll call it Friday Night and reference track, perhaps. So what I would do to export is go to File, Export, and Media. That's Control or Command M on the Mac. And then you can see that it's giving me some options right now. It's remembered my last choice, which was MP3, which would be great for getting just audio out. Usually you end up with it defaulting to something like QuickTime here, which would be excess for me right now because I don't actually have any video. So I just need to get audio. Typical ones for audio are waveform audio, that's WAV file on the Windows side, and an AIFF on the Mac side, which I don't see here because I'm on Windows. And MP3 is going to be just fine for us too, because this is a reference track, and I might choose to bump my bit rate up to 256 kilobits per second, and that'll be, you know, kind of CD quality without throwing out too much. And you can't see my OK button, so I'm gonna have to hit it off screen here. It'll say export. And now I can head on over to Photoshop, and what I will do first is create a new file that is 1920 by 1080, 72 pixels per inch, RGB color. That's going to be if I'm going to do a 16 by 9 format for this, which, oh boy, do I want to, or do I want to? Let's try widescreen on this one, 817. And there it is. That's my widescreen format. Now, it's not currently set up to do movie. What we're going to do for that is to turn on window timeline, and there's the timeline option. We say create video timeline. And now I've got time, and right now it's like the default of 5 seconds. So 15 full second. For some reason it keeps the F after the seconds mark. I don't know if that would be a really accurate way of putting it. The other part of this I can do, set timeline frame rate. So right now it's set to 30 frames per second. I'm going to go ahead and call it 12 frames per second. I'm never going to be faster than 12. I'm not going to be doing that much animation. 24 might be normal for doing animation, but 12 is going to be fine. And you notice it makes it smaller, but it's still the same number. So there was a kind of a hiccup there as it changed size, duration, where it actually has fewer pictures now, which is why it seemed to shrink. So technically, if I advance a frame at a time here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, there we are at the 1 second mark. So that's frames. And we're going to assume that pretty much anything can be done on a 1/12 of a second. Any decision we're going to make is going to be fit into there. Now, we can import our audio track under this audio track right here. We add audio. Then I got to go find where that went to. There's my file. It's a audio only file. So on my system, it looks like a little musical note. Hardly true. So here we have my audio next to my picture. My picture has extended out to the full length of the sound. But our audio track, we can't see a waveform, but we can hear it. Make sure that your little speaker boy is clicked there, and then as soon as you hit play, we should hear some dialogue. Remember, I've got an opening.
I could use a beer.
And there's the first line of dialogue. It's right around that point that he needs to be talking. Okay, so let's show you how to set this timeline thing up. I'll use my thumbnails for now. So I've got my layer palette up. I've got a background that extends out across the whole thing here. Let's start some timing things here, just as a placeholder. I'm hitting play.
I could use a beer.
Okay, so that's the first line. Right in there. I'll zoom in a little bit on the timeline. And I'm going to put a split right here. This little pair of scissors lets me put a split at wherever the play head is. That's this little control here. This tells us where we are in time, from left to right, beginning to end. And by hitting split, I get the same picture duplicated out to a new layer. The big advantage of this is that if I need to make a slight change, like an expression change or something, I'll just redraw that section of it. So my original stuff maintains its consistency and it doesn't draw attention to the fact that a change has occurred. It'll look like movement instead of like a new picture. So the reason I'm doing it like this is I'm going to basically get a little timing chart going for the events that I need to draw. In my thumbnail pass, I only had one drawing of them looking up and one where Tina rolls over. So it's kind of two poses to represent what might be several sort of character beats. So let's see what happens here. We've got
I could use a beer.
And then he stops talking.
I would love a beer.
And she starts talking. I'll go just a little bit past it there. Put a new split. There's the pause. While nobody's talking.
I'm getting.
And he starts talking there. So that's the pause there. Here's the new line.
I'm getting the beer, aren't I?
Going a piece past it.
That's what I like about you, Rick. You're the quickest.
Okay, I call this 2 acting beats.
Like
That's what I
about you, Rick.
Cut.
You're the quickest, brightest, smartest,
And that could technically be another one, but let's just leave it there. She's talking, chat, chat, chat.
smartest counselor at Camp Forest Lake.
And somewhere there is where we're cutting out to the hallway. So we now have 6, it looks like, copies. And before this gets confusing, I'm going to quickly label each of them with the basic line of dialogue so I know what each one of those beats represents. And I'll come back in and we'll be replacing these pictures incrementally. Okay, so those are our acting beats for one shot. And it seems like a lot. And you'll notice I haven't changed anything. These are just going to be placeholders for timing. This is a way to do it. You could certainly just draw straight forward. But all right, so real quick, let's put in a background that's going to work for everything. Right now, I've got a single thing called layer 0 that extends out behind the entirety of every shot. The advantage here is that I can draw my background once and it will stay static and consistent for the entire scene. And that's good because backgrounds don't change. We want them to not draw attention to themselves. We want to see what it is, but we want it to just be sitting there in the background and we'll be focused on the foreground action. All right, based on my original thumbnail, my retitled reference shots, I have a basic starting pose and a reference blue line. I did my background of the bunk beds and pillows because those will stay where they're at. And then I also, to keep a little separation, I threw in just a tone layer. So it's about a 50% gray, and I set that layer to multiply. If you have it at normal, you can't see through it. If you have it set to multiply, it darkens the stuff underneath it. Actually, the darken mode will look the same here too. Well, actually, multiply looks a little cooler. So I'm going to go with multiply. And if I find that it's too dense, I can always dial down the black line a little bit to make those foreground characters pop a little bit. So what I did, and I'm going to walk you through it here, I'm turning off my reference one. In fact, I'm pretty done with the reference. I could probably delete it. But for the very first line of dialogue, I did 2 layers. One is the line art, which gets me the pose and the outlines of things. But as you can see through them to their pillows, and so that doesn't work. So you need a fill. And I put that on a separate layer, just did a lasso tool and a little erasing and a little painting to fill them in. So they punch pretty good against the background. If I thought that white was a little too much, I can't dial it down because that's an opacity thing. But I could change the value that I'm filling with. Instead of white, I could be 30% gray. And you kind of work through your tones that way. If it's 50% in the background, keep your black line at full black, and then fill them with 10 or 30% or something, and see what you think. See if that still looks good. Now you could group those, but I kind of like treating the shot as a group. So right now I've got the entirety of that shot in its own group, and it is a lot of different layers, but those layers don't all activate at the same time. There's only 2 foreground layers and 2 background layers at a time. And I could certainly merge down some of these guys too once I'm satisfied with it. But the nice thing about not merging is that I could duplicate that fill. On my second pose, all I changed was, turn on that line, was his mouth, I think. Oh, and her head. Yeah. So she turns while they're talking. As he says, I could use a beer.
I could use a beer.
Okay. I was able to continue their fill. As you can see, the white line hasn't changed a bit. So I just duplicated that up. And now I'm up to the next pose, which is, again, reusing the fill with a minor change as she rolls over. And as you can see, I've managed to keep that fill going as long as the 4th still, as she changes expression there. So this is how you might deal with an acty kind of a setup. You've got a background that stays consistent. You've got poses changing over time, but not a lot. You're not redrawing everything. Like you'll notice that Rick, or whatever the hell his name is, his arm, his hair, nothing much changes on him except expression. And she's doing a little body movement, but minor stuff. And that took a little while to do. And then I'd start to get into the stuff that I haven't got to yet, and it's just back to my old reference stuff. Instead of deleting the reference, you might just go in here and select all, delete it, and draw it again, if you're doing a completely different change of pose. But what I was doing was taking the previous line art copy, so in this case, this pose right here, and splitting it. So zoom in a little bit. Go to the last frame or so, do a little split. I have to have it selected. There's my split. So I know that I could move this over to here. Make sure that that's the same length that I had. So there's where that ends. And then I'm going to make this one now the same length as weights. So the weights guy, let's go ahead and delete it. This one is 05 line. And I don't have any fill on there, but I bet my fill could continue through. Depending on what I do, I think she's going to close her mouth for sure. And maybe change her expression just a little bit. So let's go ahead and break in there. Make sure I'm on the right layer. E for eraser. Now here's where I want to be able to see my previous pose so that I don't draw it too differently. For this, I'm going to be posed directly between the two shots and turn on something called onion skin. Enable onion skin will let me see the last frame, and you can change the settings of that to include, maybe it's 5 frames, the 5 previous frames. Maybe the opacity is too dark for you, and you could kick it back a little bit. So right now I need to bring up my brush. And there's the new pose as she's waiting expectantly. Let's... yeah, just enough. I'm feeling like I could get one more expression out of him. So back in here, I'm going to select it, erase. Let's have the eyebrows go up. It's also almost looking at the camera there. And somewhere in here is his... oh, I guess I had a expression change there. So if I needed to retime it, look, it says change of expression. I wasn't paying attention, and I've already set this up. I can just drag that on over. This is holding for that length. And boy, I'm getting plenty of use out of the fill there. So change of expression, I need that to go this long. I can now get rid of that. So a little acting there, saving it. And now I'm ready to, finish, obviously, but I could put this out as an MP4. For that, I'm going to hit Render Video. So where is it going? It's going into my Week 9 folder. That's fine. H.264, it's the full length of the thing. I could do a work area, or I could do the whole thing. I'm just going to let the whole thing go. And Friday Animatic. Takes a second. And once I import it, I can... you'll notice it's coming with the audio here. It's got the audio built in. If I want to continue to edit my audio, you might instead double-click on it and just drag over the picture only. And there it is, doing its thing.
I could use a beer.
Oh, I would love a beer.
Go. That's a big overview of the entire Animatic pipeline.